Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of the Give My Head podcast. I'm Tim McGarry, joined by my comedy colleagues
Michael McDowell.
I'm Damon Quinn.
Ladies and gentlemen, on this show, you know we talk to politicians, actors, writers, comedians, all sorts of people, very interesting people. We have a very, very interesting young man with us today. Did I say young? I did say young.
You did say young, but I'll take that.
I would take that.
Take that. Mark Devenport. Before we get to Mark, we want to thank our sponsors, Hinch Distillery, ladies and gentlemen. Hinch Distillery, as I found out recently, based near Ballynahinch, hence the name. Hinch Distillery, a fully independent Irish whiskey and gin distillery based just outside Ballynahinch, and they produce some marvellous whiskies and gins. This particular gin, Ninth Wave, we'd like to promote Ninth Wave gin. There's tasting notes, Michael. If you want to
What's the story behind the Ninth Wave then, mate?
It's mythical, apparently. It's
right.
a Celtic myth that you pass the ninth wave to go to a different level and plane.
The spiritual world, is it?
Spiritual world, yeah. The idea is, but it's actually based on the idea that the ninth wave is the one that's more powerful than the other waves before.
The realm of gods and spirits.
That's it.
There's the
That's
ninth
it.
carried in on the ninth wave.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you get a couple of waves of that.
You'll get
the
there.
nine.
If you take 9 shots,
you'll be
you
all
know
right.
what
You'll
way
get
you're
there.
on, yeah.
You'll be in that spiritual world.
Well, this particular gin has a pithy citrus, spice notes with nettles, pine needles, fresh mint, and on the palate, honey and key lime pie. Smooth and extremely well balanced, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a little early in the morning for the gin, even for you, Mark Devenport. Is that true? Correct?
Yeah,
really
I
early.
would say I'm more of a whiskey than a gin person, but I'm not really
Well, they have an excellent-
Well, the whiskey is superb.
Right.
It's really peaty. It's really nice.
All right.
Right, so Hinch Distillery, thank you very much for your support. You can go to hinchdistillery.com. They have tours if you're interested in whiskey and gin.
Yeah, and I've done them, yeah, I've done
You've done the
one.
gin
Yeah,
tour.
it's
You can also, if you're really interested and have a lot of money, say maybe you worked for the BBC a long time and you have a lot of in your fat pension, you could have, you could own a cask of Hinch Distillery Irish whiskey. You could actually own a cask as an investment. You can share the legacy and savour the return. Just contact heather.mccracken at hinchdistillery.com for more information on that if you want to do, or get the tours. Thank you very much to Hinch Distillery. As I said, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you realise I'm sort of coming out in allergies now because I've worked for the BBC so long that to be so close to advertising, you know,
It's not right.
more or
Yes.
less allergic
We
to
are in
it.
a different world of podcasts,
Good
my
Lord,
friend.
yeah.
Yes.
I know.
We can advertise whiskey and gin. I can advertise the finest football club in the world, namely Cliftonville. Do you know who that is?
I'm very sorry I didn't bring my Saintfield United T-shirt with
Is that
me.
your
but
team,
there you
Saintfield
go.
United?
Yeah, well, one of them, yeah.
Right. Is that
Along
your-
with Oxford United,
Right.
which is my birthplace.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mark Devenport. There are very few people who won't know Mark Devenport, but people of a certain age might remember you as more of the political correspondent during the dark days of the Troubles and the peace process, mainly. But you are an Englishman. And by the way, for years I thought it was Davenport. It's Devonport, as in Devonport.
Yeah.
Do people mix your name?
A large portion of my work has actually been lost to time now because if you look for it in the archive, it's all there under Davenport as opposed to Devonport. So you have to kind of look both ways in order to see.
The only Davenport I ever knew was the guy at the Rent-A-Coast. Mr. Davenport.
All right.
Rent-A-Coast.
Well, there was for a while at school, I had a nickname Beer at Home, and that was because there was a TV advert running in our part of England anyway called Beer at Home Means Davenports, and it was one of those home brewing kits. So for about 3 years, I was known as Beer at Home.
Well, that was your nickname. All right.
Yeah.
So you're from Oxford?
I am from Oxford. Sounds very posh, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It was less posh, actually, when I was growing up. I was on the wrong side of the tracks in Oxford, if there is such a thing.
You're from the rough side?
The rough side of
Yeah. There's a car factory bit to Oxford, you see, and my dad worked for the car factory, and then there's a university bit, so
Right.
we were more the car factory bit.
Did you go to the university bit?
I didn't go to the university bit because I was a traitor. I went to the other university
You went to
over in
Cambridge.
Cambridge. But back in those days, I actually wanted to get away and be independent and not have my mum calling around all the time and washing my socks. Whereas, I soon realised that was a big mistake and that I should have stuck around and be looked after by my mum.
Right, so you weren't good at looking after yourself, is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Yeah,
generally
right.
speaking.
Did you study at Cambridge?
I was a historian.
All right.
Indeed, yeah, which is why I still share that love of history that I know you have,
I
Mr.
do,
McGarry.
but yeah. Well, yeah, the long and the short of it, by the way, way, we're filming a brand new series of The Long and the Short of It, which will be on
yeah.
soon, and there are episodes available online at BBC iPlayer for The Long and the Short of It. See, I'm advertising the BBC as well as Genuine Whiskey.
That's great.
But
That's not advertising, that's promotion.
that's promoting.
What was your period like? What did you?
Well, mostly sort of modern stuff, but I did do some 19th century, some 18th century. I did some sort of international relations and decolonisation and things like that, which is, I studied Mahatma Gandhi, and I ended up going out and working for a newspaper in India for a while.
Wow.
I was a short-lived correspondent for the Hindu newspaper in Madras, now known as Chennai. And I also recall in my interview for Cambridge that the rather crusty professor asked me what was the solution to the Irish question.
How long have you got?
How long have you got?
You just said, Brits, right?
It's a bit like that. Well, what I said is it needed a prime minister to do a William Ewart Gladstone and put trying to resolve matters of Ireland above their actual career. And I don't know whether Tony Blair did that or not. I'm not quite convinced, you know.
Gladstone didn't succeed.
Well, he didn't, right.
I remember like Tony Blair coming over and doing the whole peace process, and he came out. We were in the BBC. We were in the bar. Remember the days of the BBC bar?
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, they'll get rid of all those things now, all the woke stuff. But
All
in
the
those
fun
days,
stuff.
there was the BBC bar, and he came out. He got out of his limo, and he you were probably with him, and he was waving up to us. We were, hey Tony, you know. And I remember thinking, coming in, you know, having a drink, going, you know what, that man can do no wrong in my book.
Whatever happened to that?
That went badly wrong.
So you're from Oxford. You go to Cambridge University. You study history, and you think, oh, I must go to Northern Ireland. That looks like the place to be.
It wasn't quite as simple as that. I initially actually got a sort of job in international journalism. I was working in the World Service, just on a sort of temporary job there. And this was in the days when everything was coming in on telex machines, and I was basically a copy taster, and I had to kind of get this carbon-backed telex and sort it out for other much more experienced journalists and literally get my hands dirty. And if the telex was no good, you put it on the spike. So that was very old-style journalism, and then running around and giving it to these more experienced correspondents to write their bits and pieces that they were giving to the World Service. But off the back of that, I got a place on the BBC News training scheme where you go around the corporation, you do 3 months here, 3 months there. And I wasn't meant to be coming to this place at all. Somebody else was down to do Belfast, and then they dropped out at the last minute. Somebody came to me and said, what are you up to on Friday? I said, I'm going to Southampton. Said, no, you're not. You're going to Belfast. And the rest is history.
Oh, wow. And you can't get rid of us now.
Exactly, yeah. I can't shake.
It was a thing, though. You did get the English journalists coming over here. They were all here at one stage. Paxman was here. Kate Adie was here. It was kind of part of the sort of rite of passage to come to them.
Yeah, I mean, when I was there, you had that kind of mixture of obviously some really good local journalists, the Dennis Murrays, the Chris Moores, and so on. And then you also had these people like Nicholas Witchell had come through, David Shookman was here, Lance Price was here. John Simpson came in and out at various stages, I think. But yeah, it was a sort of a rite of passage. I was much lower down the food chain.
Were you a younger man when you came here? That's a stupid question. Yes.
Yes,
were you younger many years ago? Mark, were you younger? Were you ever young?
Can you do subtraction?
I think the question really is, how did you end up getting stuck here?
How did I end up? Well, initially, I quite liked the place initially because it was a sort of fast-moving news environment, and whilst I wasn't doing those big stories, it meant that actually you got on the telly much more quickly than you maybe did in other areas where they could rehearse their news. Yeah. So there were some areas of England that actually ran full rehearsals of their news programme in the middle of the afternoon because they knew that nothing was going to be changing. Yeah. Definitely didn't happen here. Right. Here, I wasn't going to be put on a major story, but if there was a sort of Lord Mayor's show or some pop singer who was coming through, I might get that to sort of lower down the bulletin thing.
So what period are we talking? When were you here?
We're talking about the mid-1980s here. So around just after the Anglo-Irish Agreement, I was around, I think, initially at the time of the Loyalist Day of Action, when things were closed down a bit there, 1986. Yeah. So it was relatively hot and heavy out in the streets, but in terms of sort of being a young journalist, you're given quite a lot to do. I went back to London, and then a job came up, and the message came, you should think of putting in for that because you got on quite well when you did your short stint. And so the rest is history. I came over thinking it would be a few years but then, as you know, occasionally sort of things intervene, including meeting my girlfriend, now wife.
Right, and she's from here.
She's from here, yeah. She's from
right.
East Belfast, and so once we settled down and had kids, the chain was pulled in.
Right.
You're not going anywhere else.
No. You're saying somebody from here would go marry an Englishman and go, where are we going to live? And you go, we're going to live in England. You go, no, you're not. We're staying here. You're staying here. You're staying near my ma.
Exactly. Which was great because they did a lot of the childcare and it all worked out happily ever after.
Was it easier because having an English accent here being a journalist?
Well, initially, I actually noticed there's a story in the papers today about some poor student actually being discriminated against when she came over to Derry by people who didn't like it because she was English. And I got a wee bit of that, obviously, but that was outweighed by the welcome that I got from people. I had just one friend, or he was a friend of a friend of my brother's actually, who was a guitarist, a guy called Terence McKee, came from Mackeraw, and he was really good to me initially because he picked me up from Aldergrove, which was still pretty highly secure in those days, and he took me to my digs. But rather than just dropping me off and leaving me, he said, I want to go and see some friends. Do you want to come along? And I found myself on the first day, I was in Belfast sitting down with these friends who turned out to be the Sharabang Theatre Company. And I know you had Ian McElhinney and Mary Jones on the podcast previously, but I found myself sitting down with them and with Alan Methven, and they said to me, so you're from England and you don't know anything about this place, but you've come to report the news for the people here. And I said, well, that's about the picture. And they said, well, good luck to you, and kind of gave me a whiskey. but we hit it off there, and subsequently I came back and I ended up sharing a house with them. So so we kept in touch.
Wow, and you loved it here, and it was still a nasty time. But you went up the ladder, didn't you? You kind of doing reports about nasty incidents and stuff, and then you started doing big political interviews.
Yeah, I mean, my career progression was that I went from sort of being a newsroom journalist to being more of a reporter, and was out doing news reporting during some sort of the more difficult times here, and then I went to Spotlight, was a Spotlight reporter, and then made it onto the sort of network news, as we would call it, became Ireland correspondent, which was why I was doing a lot of those big news stories around the time of the IRA ceasefire and the Good Friday Agreement and so on. Things I think might have been different because one time when I was a local reporter, I was actually on a shift at the weekend, and we were trying to sort things out. And this was around the time post-Gibraltar, when you'd had Gibraltar, and then you'd had the Michael Stone incident, and then there was going to be 3 funerals. And the 3 funerals were happening, and Austin Hunter was meant to take the first funeral in the morning. I was meant to take the second funeral, which was an IRA funeral, and then Austin would do the third, and then he was going to package them all together, and that was the plan. And then in the middle of the night, I got a phone call from Austin to say there'd been another murder down in Fermanagh, and he was going to have to go to that. And so basically everybody had to shunt along, and I had to take the first funeral of the day of Michael Stone's victims, and another journalist took the second funeral, and then everything was kind of shifting on. That second funeral, which I had been due to do, turned out to be the one where the Corporal's incident happened. And basically, I was sent to the scene, but not until after everything had sort of played out. And the journalist who took the job from me did very well in terms of resisting quite a lot of intimidation at the scene and getting the film away and getting it back to the newsroom. But there was quite a lot of intimidation that happened afterwards. You remember there were court cases, a lot of intimidation.
Police arrived at the BBC to try and get the footage.
That particular journalist, as well as one of our bosses, ended up leaving Northern Ireland for a long period of time. And I always thought in terms of sliding doors moments that if that had been me, I probably wouldn't have come back at that stage. I hadn't met my girlfriend, hadn't settled down. So there's the sort of rub in terms of things
Younger
that can
listeners
happen.
again mightn't remember that was a horrible period. March
It was an awful,
1988.
awful
It was the
period,
3 Irish men killed in Gibraltar. Then one of their funerals, the Michael Stone killed 3 people. Did he kill? 4
Yeah,
people?
and then
there was the corporal's murder, and it was 1988, and it just seemed like it was never.
It was
going
grim,
to bloody end,
yeah.
and it was grim and miserable. And I remember we were quite depressed at the time.
Well, it was my first day in court.
Yeah,
I was
your
the
first
apprentice solicitor. Was the corporal's trial.
oh right.
Yeah. So grim period.
Well,
and-
you'll know then the role that's.
yes.
There was this kind of slightly crazy rule that journalists had to appear to say, yes, this is the film.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even though it was pretty obviously the film, and because of that, pressure could be brought to bear, which is, fortunately things have calmed down and they're a bit better now. But I think my career would have been very different, and I'd have just cleared out and probably never come back.
So you stayed for another 10 years, because I remember Give Me Head Peace came out in 1998. Well, in 1995 was 2 seasons version. In 1998, 1999, 2000, you left to go to the UN, and I remember it because I made a wee speech at your going away do.
Did you?
I did.
Were you very rude about me?
Yes, I was very rude about it. I was performing the part of Da, and I said it was always good to see a Brit leave the 6 counties. Even though you were going to New York at the time, so you don't even remember it. I worked for nothing. I just don't even remember it.
Well, there've been so many laughs with you, Tim, down through.
You shut.
What I do remember, actually, do you remember this? That for a short while, Nuala McKeever was a researcher on Spotlight.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
Nuala McKeever, who played Emer in the first 2 series of Comedian.
Formerly of this gang, and am I also right in thinking that some of you might have made an early TV appearance in a Spotlight reconstruction?
We
I've
did,
got a
yeah.
vague notion
Yeah,
about
yeah, I think
that.
we
It
did.
probably should almost not be mentioned.
I think I did Jerry Adams a couple of times. With the
Well-
days when they weren't allowed to talk.
Well, I think it was something to do with the UDR being
Yes.
done away with.
Yes.
So it wasn't actually a broadcasting ban thing, but I had done an interview. Basically, the government was dismantling the UDR and
Yes.
making it
Oh,
the Royal
yes.
Irish Regiment.
That's right.
We did a song in our stage show at the time.
Yeah.
That's what we did, where the ADR was singing the
No,
soldiers.
I did that as well, but I was I was the man with the back of the head shot.
Oh, you were the man with the back, right? Okay.
Because the guys wouldn't go on camera.
Yeah, because basically, I interviewed a couple of UDR soldiers who were very unhappy about whatever the government was doing at the time. And I do remember it because I recorded the interview, but they didn't want that tape to go anywhere. So I said, look, I'll transcribe it here in front of you and and there was a coal fire in the room and I threw it in the fire so they could see it go up in smoke. But we had these words, but we needed somebody to speak them. And I think Michael helped out.
Wow.
Because
I never asked back again.
the funny thing was,
Never asked back to do.
Nuala was in the show at that time and with us still, and I said, she said, what was that about? And I said, well, I wanted to keep it secret. And they said, well, look at your ears, I know it's you.
Prince George.
Anonymous.
Yeah.
Anonymity.
King George, is he now?
Anonymity ruined. So you were there, sort of all the peace processy stuff and Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah.
And then you decided, that's job done, I'll go to the UN. And did you have fun at the United Nations? Did you get all around the world, didn't you? With the
Well, actually, it was mostly based in New York. You were there covering mostly the Security Council, which was making decisions on sort of peace and war. And by and large, actually, I found in terms of TV, whilst I was very busy with the World Service Radio, who were sort of big customers for anything that I put out about international politics, if there was a good story, normally I got the clip of Michael or Tim or whoever is talking at the United Nations about this, and then it was sent off to wherever the story was actually happening, because that's where the pictures were.
Yeah.
So in terms of TV, it was kind of a little bit more low profile than what I've been used to in Northern Ireland. So, but that was just something to sort of put into the mix. Alongside that, you were working in New York and living there, which was an amazing experience for a couple of years. That was 99 through to early 2001. And also I like getting my head around different kinds of stories, because I've been doing effectively the same kind of a story here in quite a while, for quite a few years. And so, getting my head around that was interesting. But one interesting thing is here you tended to get recognised because you were on the TV. At one point, I did end up going over to Sierra Leone just around the time I was a UN correspondent, and I'd been one of the main UN correspondents when Sierra Leone had a big civil war and the whole place had been in turmoil. And in fact, we hadn't, for a period of time, we didn't have a correspondent in the country. And so I was basically having to do it all, just my voice. And it was kind of interesting because when I did arrive in Sierra Leone, I kind of went through and like, there was no recognition whatsoever and nobody had seen me. But when they opened up the passport and looked at the name, they went, the guy off the radio. And suddenly I started having people coming up to me and talking to me about my reports. So that was a kind of slightly different
Was it Sierra Leone
experience.
that Tony Blair sorted out? Or was that my
Yes.
Yeah, it was Sierra Leone,
Yeah,
very,
they
very
sorted
quick
it.
operation.
It was because when I was at the UN, there was a lot of talk about humanitarian intervention and things that happened in terms of Kosovo and then Sierra Leone. And with the end of the Cold War, they started to think, well, look, we can actually do some good here, you know, when you've got some dictators who, for instance, in Sierra Leone, there were gang leaders who were chopping people's limbs off. And I think Tony Blair thought, oh, well, this is the way ahead, you know, we can enforce human rights and just with a relatively sort of limited intervention here. It was called humanitarian intervention at that stage. But then, of course, subsequently, you had 9/11 and then you had Iraq and the whole thing fell apart.
You weren't in New York for 9/11, were you?
No. I'd left in the spring of 2001. So it was a weird experience because, you know, I lived in New York. I wasn't around the World Trade Center, but I quite frequently would have ended up going to the shopping centre that was in the base of the World Trade Centre, knew the area quite well, knew some people who lived around there. So to be back here and seeing what was happening to these streets that I'd been wandering around was extraordinary. And a short while after, actually, I got an award for the documentary we did in Sierra Leone, and I had to go back to UN headquarters to pick up this award. It was the United Nations award.
What a bind.
Which was
I was going to New York to pick up my award.
Well, it was great as a trip, but it was one of those ones where the shuttle coming, or the plane coming into New York, it was still, you could see the devastation below. And actually it was still at the stage where you weren't allowed to leave your seat in any American domestic flight at that stage for any reason. So, you know, the security was pretty tight at that stage. So that was one of the things that I recalled. And then I visited the scene shortly thereafter, but no, I wasn't there at the time.
My mate David Hume, who I think you know well, Dr. David Hume.
Indeed.
He said, you're interviewing Mark Devenport. I said, ask him about the time he met the Minister for Executions. And I went, what? The what? The Minister? Was this during your UN time? Did you?
No, actually, this was for Spotlight. I was a Spotlight reporter at the time of the famine in Somalia. And you might remember, you know, you'd had the famine in Ethiopia and Michael Burke and then Live Aid and all of that. And then
that's where
you
we
had
started,
early
mid-80s.
And then you had, in the 90s, a famine in Somalia, which was just awful. And there was a lot of concern. And Mary Robinson went out and there was a lot of relief being sent over from Ireland and people raising money. And we decided in Spotlight that we were going to go with, there was a big plane, it was like a Russian cargo jet that was taking off from Aldergrove with a lot of supplies for Somalia. And we went over and followed basically the workers from Concern, who were all kind of like Northern Ireland or Irish aid workers on the ground, and saw what they were doing. But Mogadishu was divided at that stage. It was kind of like two factions who were fighting over the capital, and there was a kind of a peace line. And at one point, I wanted to go and see the supposed president of Mogadishu, who was just actually the leader of another faction there, and interview him about something. So we went across, and I went with the Concern workers, and the Concern were very good, and they kind of like more or less provided the transport, and I was kind of living in under their shadow, basically. You know, I'm here with the good people from Concern, and they were kind of like keeping me safe and keeping the crew safe. And I went to interview these guys in this other faction, and I suddenly realized as the interview was proceeding that they had a big beef with Concern for not operating in their particular area,
Oh, right.
which was probably because they didn't want to pay the bribes and all of that were being asked of them. And this became more and more obvious as the interview went on. And I tried to kind of steer away from it as I realised this was difficult. But the camera crew, after we finished the interview with the president, the camera crew went up to the top of the building to get some sort of shots over Mogadishu, and they're working away. And at this point, the guy from the Somali interim government came over to talk to me and Linda McClelland, who was the worker for Concern. And he said, we are very, very angry with Concern for not working in our area, and we want you to move and to have your food distribution centres in our area and all of this. And she said, oh, well, yes, we can discuss that. He said, look, madam, I must tell you, I am the minister in charge of executions. I am the man who organises the ambushes. You have to listen to me very seriously. And I overheard all of this. I was part of this conversation, and Linda just whispered to me, Mark, get me out of here. So, having gone in under the umbrella of Concern, it was evident that what was getting us out of the building was the umbrella of the BBC.
Yeah, always.
And I went up, and the camera crew were upstairs, and they were going from the roof. Oh no, we're getting another shot here. And I'm going, you're not getting another shot here.
Enough shots,
We've got enough shots, lads.
We
We're getting
other
out
shots of a different variety.
now. And I just extracted them from the roof and extracted us from the building as fast as possible to get away from the ministry in charge of executions.
Lovely.
That sort of correspondent, I mean, that you're not a war correspondent, but you've seen some stuff here and abroad. I mean, does that affect you personally? I mean, you could...
Well, yeah. At the time, I think you're on adrenaline and you have to get through it because, I've got a half an hour film to make. I need to get pictures here of people who are affected by the famine in this way, or I need to get pictures of people who are affected by the war. So you are making decisions. Obviously, you're taking advice as to whether it's safe to go here or to go there, but you kind of get through it. But that was a sort of very difficult trip, and I think afterwards, there was a lot of pause for thought. At the time, I felt I was almost on autopilot. Yeah. For instance, on that particular trip, we were taking pictures, and I took pictures of a lorry that was going around and picking up the bodies, and there was a child there, and nobody knew the child's name. He was just kind of lying by the road, and I thought, in the moment, you kind of think, well, this is going to affect you deeply, but at the same time, you know that you have to carry on filming and getting the material that you need in order to make an effective film, which I'm glad to say did contribute to the aid that was then subsequently raised and the workers who volunteered to go out there. But yes, it was tough. Another thing that actually happened there, which was as bad as seeing the kind of victims of the famine, was that we had security guards on the top of our Jeep because of the security threat there was there, and they were just basically riding on the top of the Jeep. And at one point on the rough roads, as the guy was bowling along with the Land Rover, one of the security guards came off the top of the Jeep and fell and was severely injured. And in a Western world, we might have been able to rush him to the Royal or to the Ulster, and somebody might have performed some kind of emergency surgery. In that country, it was a long drive to the nearest hospital, and the nearest hospital turned out to be a doctor with a kind of a bottle of 1,000 aspirin tablets. There was really nothing they could do, and the guy died.
Oh, God.
And that was harrowing because he basically died in front of our eyes there in the Land Rover.
Wow. So being a correspondent on the BBC, there is a great variety of stuff, but also that kind of feeling of there's some certain war correspondents you talk about who love it and get an awful lot of adrenaline out of it, but they're also very severely affected by what they've seen.
Yeah,
I
think there's been a lot more talk now about trauma. Certainly in the and I haven't seen half of what those who are doing this sort of day in, day out. I've done a few trips that have had some sort of difficult aspects to it, but by and large, although I've seen some interesting times here in Northern Ireland, some interesting times in other places, I haven't really been exposed on a sort of day in and daily basis to that kind of trauma. And certainly back in the 80s, it was just get on with it. And you talked about the BBC Club. I think that was how people coped
How are you
with
dealing
it.
with your trauma? Have a gin or a whiskey? Yeah,
There was a lot of
facetious.
alcohol taken, and not necessarily by me because I don't have the capacity. I'm just too small.
You don't have the
basically.
physique for it.
I think I was termed by some of my other journalistic colleagues one of the Ovaltinis because I would cut out after maybe about 3 pints.
So I see you wrote a biography of Gerry Adams.
I did indeed. Man of War, Man of Peace.
Man of War, Man of Peace. Did you have his cooperation for it?
Sadly, no. What we didn't realise at the time, that was co-written by myself and David Sharrock, who was the Guardian correspondent at the time, and some publishers came to us and said, look, a lot of publicity about Gerry Adams. We think that there have been some previous books, but we think it could now be updated. There's a market for it. And we went to see Gerry Adams' chief press officer, Richard Macaulay, and he said, there might be a problem there because, whatever you say about Gerry, there's going to be some people who'll like it, some people who won't. But what we didn't know at that time is that he was working on his own autobiography, Before the Dawn, which was due out. So there were some initial talks about having cooperation, but it didn't really amount to much. So in a way, we became kind of like the unauthorised version at that stage.
You didn't allege he was in the IRA or anything, did you? Make
Good
that?
Lord.
Did that?
Good Lord
Did that
above.
come up?
I'm reliably informed, according to an Irish court, that that's a route that he never took. But if you read this book called Man of War, Man of Peace,
Right.
you'll find a different
Okay,
curriculum
there's a
vitae.
different- Right, okay, there's a different version?
Yeah. I mean, it's impossible to imagine really Gerry Adams doing what he did in terms of the peace process without having authority on both sides of the Republican movement. And I firmly believe that he did have
That authority.
That authority.
Did he read your book?
Did you get a review? is there a one-star review on Amazon? Don't read this nonsense.
I obviously went off to the States for a couple of years, and then I came back, and I was political editor. And one time at a Sinn Féin Ardèche, shortly after, not shortly after publication, but shortly after I returned, I was down to do Gerry Adams live into some programme, and he comes beside me, and the producer's saying into my ear, 1 second, 1 minute to go, Mark. I'm saying, fine, okay. And Gerry turned to me at that point, and he said, why did you write that awful book about me? And yes, he did. And they're saying 30 seconds to go, Mark. And so I thought, now's not the time for sort of a lengthy conversation about this. So given that it was Man of War, Man of Peace, to my endless discredit, and David Sharrock, my co-author, always takes me to task for this, I said to him, Gerry, I wrote the good half.
Oh, you miserable cringing card. I think I'd have done exactly the same. I wrote the Man of Peace, but that was me.
But Tom Hartley, I think, reviewed it in Republican News, and he said, this is a well-researched book. However, ultimately, it's a distant and distorted view. So we did consider for the paperback putting Republican News, well-researched.
But you did give him the credit for his part in
Oh yeah, I think
the
you.
peace process.
I think you had to because he hadn't got the Nobel Prize, but he put in a lot of the work together with Martin McGuinness. And if it hadn't been for that kind of leadership, then the Republican movement would never have necessarily followed the path that it did. So, he was an incredible leader in terms of being able to slowly but surely move people who weren't really ready for the steps that they subsequently took to do that. But how anyone could believe that the IRA would do what it did just on the basis of some guy who is a former barman who's interested in politics. I don't know. Maybe, Damon, you could persuade them to do something.
Coming from West Belfast, I'm going to stay out of this.
It's okay. You don't have the money the BBC have. He won't sue you. Yeah, he did take the BBC for quite a lot of money.
That was quite a lot of money.
But there was more specific allegation than anyway.
Yeah.
But your book, you weren't sued. You weren't sued for alleging that he was.
No.
Right.
No.
Okay. And did it sell well? Did it?
Yeah, well, it's no longer in print. I think somebody should really bring it out again. Yeah. But what I was told
I'll lend
is
you my
that
copy. I have it at home.
Apparently it disappeared quite well.
Right.
From various bookshops.
Oh,
and
that's a really good thing.
I went into a bookshop and I said, well, why is this brand new book not on display? And they said, well, we've taken it down from the shelves because basically it's being nicked at quite a rate of knots.
Right.
So I think maybe there were maybe some people who wanted to read it.
You can't get it. Yeah, look that up on Amazon. Can I buy a copy of Mark Devenport's book,
Man of War,
Jerry
Man
Adams,
of Peace.
Man of War, Man of Peace. It might be very expensive now.
Yeah, probably is. It's probably
going
going
to my copy.
Oh, I'm glad you got one. Yeah.
But it didn't make you enough money that you could retire. Should we put it?
Sadly,
no.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But writing a book I've never written a proper. Does that takes a long time?
It did actually. Although we were both quite busy in our day jobs for the Guardian and for the BBC, and we started off reworking the first few chapters and rewriting them and making them absolutely perfect. And then it's like any project, by the end, you had the publishers saying, where is this? And we're blattering away almost as fast as we wrote a new script on it, But it basically sort of took our lives up for the best part of the year, I would have said,
Are you proud of it?
Oh yes, yeah. It was an achievement at the time, and there've been other books now that have come through where people have, with the peace process, you've started getting other sources that are talking, and particularly things like the secret history of the IRA that was filled in a lot more detail than we had at the time. Right. But we think we did a pretty good job.
Because it was more controversial at the time because it was early stages of the peace process, and it was kind of leave Jerry alone. He's let him finish off the peace process, and you having a.
You knew you were kind of getting into an area that might interest people when I was in the archive at one point and I ordered up some files that hadn't been looked at before, and Jerry Adams' father, when he was involved in the IRA in the 1940s and was in prison, and I ordered up this file. And the guys brought it was when the Public Record Office was in Balmoral. The guys sort of brought it out from behind the scenes, and then I suddenly saw them kind of looking at what it was and reading a page, and I'm thinking, hang on a moment, I ordered this file, and I didn't get it for about 20 minutes whilst they assiduously read the whole thing.
Yeah, Jerry's dad was in the 40s, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. There was one of our early chapters was called Shootout in Salton Street, and that was
during the war, was it?
Yes, yeah.
All right. Doing an episode on Irish neutrality, we'll bring that up. So after the UN, you like a dog returning to its own sick, you came back to Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I mean,
for the love of a good woman, or for work, or for a bit of both, or
a bit of both, really. We had our first child in 2001, and Joseph, my son, and
good name,
and then I came back and I spent a short period of time down in Dublin on Shane Harrison's sofa whilst I bemused about how expensive getting a flat was going to be in Dublin, because the BBC for a while wanted me to be the Dublin correspondent. Then I got a phone call saying there's this school, Holy Cross, and things are taking off there, get up the road. And I was outside Holy Cross for quite a while amidst the protests there. In fact, there was a period of time then when I had this sort of recollection of going to kind of cocktail parties with the ambassadors at the United Nations and talking to them about diplomacy. And then a few months later, I was there and in the darkness of Ardoyne with things pinging around me and trying to work out, was that ball bearings, or was that bullets pinging off the wall?
Yes,
beside? I thought I made a very bad career move there. But
Northern Ireland did not cover itself in glory in that particular episode.
it was pretty ugly
It
time
was
again.
really grim
nasty.
and ugly.
And anyway, I did that for a little while, and then Stephen Grimmerson up to Noft to go work for the Northern Ireland Executive. He was the political editor, and I suddenly realised, oh, here's a chance to still be in Belfast, not at the beck and call of network news, sending you wherever you are, and it just fitted what was going on.
You became the
with my
political
life.
editor for BBC Northern Ireland.
I did indeed, yeah.
Excellent. And did you enjoy that post?
It was great because obviously it was very similar to what I'd been doing previously as Ireland correspondent, but obviously rather less of the sort of ambulance chasing. But that was already becoming a bit less of the job anyway with the peace process. So instead it was a case of getting under the skin of the politicians as best as I could, and beginning to follow what was going on at Stormont.
We know quite a few journalists through various things. Well, Dennis Murray, we know and loved. We used to meet him in the BBC club quite often.
That's surprising.
Chris Moore, we would know very well.
Yeah.
Chris has a brilliant book out at the minute about the Concora thing. We've done, and he did a lot of work on the Brenton Smith, the paedophile priest stuff. The journalism here is is it in a good state? Is it in a productive state? Some people criticise journalists here and say, "Oh, they're all in they're just kind of kowtowing to where either the British or they come from one perspective." Do you have an outside perspective as an Englishman that this is a bit different from a local?
I mean, obviously, there's lots of different kinds of journalists here, and obviously, the Troubles journalism was different. It tended to be more reactive to whatever was going on. Now, with the peace process, you got into almost a sort of element of, I suppose, Kremlinology, trying to read these documents and work out exactly what was going to happen. And now people are, having to, you've got a more stable society, but people are maybe having to put in a lot of effort to find stories that are meaningful to people as well. It's not necessarily the case that the agenda will be completely filled up, so you get maybe more planning going into the news process and so on. People will always have criticisms of journalism. It's inevitable. Sometimes they're kind of valid, and sometimes it's just the usual giving off. You could ask me, when you mentioned Dennis Murray, you could ask me about the time we were mistaken for a married couple.
Whoa! You and Dennis Murray. I mean, I know Dennis. I love Dennis. I wouldn't have put you together now, but
there was a time when Dennis and I, in the mid-90s, were continually going across to Washington DC because there were all these things that were happening with the peace process. Not just the St. Patrick's Day get-togethers, but there were times when Bill Clinton was involved in round of talks. One of those times, Dennis and I were on a flight which got massively delayed. And by the time we got to Washington, D.C., we went to our hotel and they'd given away our room. So we weren't very happy about that. So they rang around and they basically sorted out a room in, I think it was Pentagon City. It was actually a hotel that became famous later as somewhere where Monica Lewinsky was arrested. But anyway, They sorted out in the middle of the night this room, and we ended up going to this luxury hotel to be shown up to the honeymoon suite, which was the only place that was still available. And I remember the concierge, the staff, showing us into the room. We looked, and there was like one big double poster there.
Heart-shaped with petals strewn across it.
And I said to the guy, "This is lovely, but where's the other bed?" And he said, "Oh, well, we can bring you a rollaway, sir. Are you sure?" I said, "Well," we tossed a coin. I got the full poster bed,
brilliant.
and Dennis got the rollaway.
Oh.
But but we phoned it because we were sort of lost then in the system in this sort of honeymoon suite in a hotel that we weren't meant to be. We phoned in, spoke to somebody in the office and said, look, everything's changed. We're in this place. The message never got passed on, and something happened in the news that was big in relation to Northern Ireland the next day, and the office is ringing the hotel where we're meant to be, and they're denying all knowledge of us, and then they're thinking there's an accident and ringing around all the hospitals in Washington, D.C. And eventually we rang in and was told, where the heck are you? Said in the honeymoon suite.
You're still working for the BBC Free, or do bits and pieces for you?
I do bits and pieces on a
more or less retired.
Totally freelance.
Right.
If they want me to do a bit of commentary or presenting, I'll do that. But I'm.
Can you comment on things? If I was to say to you, like you were in Washington, you were in New York and stuff, and put this the right way, American presidents seem to be slightly more civilized in those days than they are now, and you've got a certain president who doesn't like you, goes, use fake news, I'm not answering your question, totally despises journalists except ones who kowtow to him. Mm-hmm. Do you have any comment to make on the state of...
Well, yeah, slowly but surely I think I'm becoming a little bit more free in terms of my comment, because initially I did get quite a lot of presenting. I'm not doing so much of that now. And in terms of commentary, I'm not particularly impressed by the current incumbent of the White House, and particularly by his speech at the United Nations. And I kind of think, well, you may as well just come out and say it. At the same time, I sort of make the point that if I am presenting a BBC programme, I will put the BBC hat on and be aware that it's entirely impartial. But yeah, since I'm not presenting a BBC programme now, I think, the Trump approach, for instance, to the UN was definitely like being stuck next to your least favourite uncle with his most terrible views and not being able to get away from him at some kind of big event.
The worst thing is he doesn't even take a drink. Do you know what he should do? We should send him over some Hinch whiskey and gin. That would lighten him up. Because he doesn't take a drink. I would never trust people who don't take a drink. Though, to be fair, he did stop the war between Azerbaijan and Cambodia, which you've got to admit is a hell of an achievement.
Yeah, having given it never existed in the first place.
Well, they're 4,000 miles apart. And
he should definitely get the Nobel Prize, but I'm not sure it should be peace. It could be medicine. It could be physics. True. It could be chemistry, because he seems to know everything about
or literature
the
for the art of the deal.
How many American presidents did you actually meet in your?
Yeah, prime ministers, presidents.
Yeah, I interviewed Bill Clinton on a couple of occasions, and so he was the one I knew best because of his involvement with the peace process. I was there when Barack Obama and George W. Bush were in, and I don't think I got an actual question to them, but I've been in sort of various places where they've been around and about, and have interviewed Hillary Clinton as well. But the Bill Clinton one was actually when I was United Nations correspondent, and the strange thing about that is that I hadn't put in a bid to interview him. And actually, I think I have Alistair Campbell to thank for this. At some point in the peace process, there was a big problem, and I think Downing Street and Alistair Campbell decided that if Bill Clinton would say something about this, that it might help them over a particular hurdle. And basically, in the middle of the night, I got a phone call in New York to say, what are you up to tomorrow? And I said, well, a couple of things on in the UN. They said, no, you're not up to that. You're going to get up very early in the morning and go to Connecticut and interview Bill Clinton. And I said, are you kidding? And no. And what had happened is that the White House had rung up and said, look, if somebody from the BBC gets to where he is at a fundraiser in Connecticut, he'll give you an interview about this point in the Northern Ireland process. He wants to speak out about it. So we all trundled off early in the morning to go and interview him. And he made his point, but the most memorable thing that happened there was not actually the interview at all. It was the preamble to the interview, because we set up our gear in the house of a rich Democrat, and we we're just about to get rolling, and I had all the various flunkies around, and the president will be with you shortly, and yes, 5 minutes to, and they'd sort of give a countdown, and he came in, and then I settled him down, concentrating on getting the questions right. And I got my first question out, and he got literally like 2 words of the first answer out. And then the lights went, and all the equipment went. And I was sat there thinking, this is not good. This is one of
BBC equipment.
this is one of the bigger interviews of my career, and it's all going to go up the Swanee, etc. So,
Bill, give us 10, 15 minutes, are we?
So basically, I kind of tried to, like you would now, if everything went off, calm down a moment.
No, I'd blame him.
Exactly.
Just
So I said to Bill, I'm sure this will all get sorted out in a moment, Mr. President, if you could just sort of bear with us, etc. And people were running around, and I started making conversation with him, and I didn't want to kind of go over the Northern Ireland politics, so I started making conversation about what Chelsea was up to, and Hillary, and where he was due to leave the White House, where they were going to live, and so on, and what they'd been doing. And it turned out that there was actually a blackout in that whole area of the United States at that stage for some reason, and the whole house had gone down. So what we had to do is we had to run a cable out to a broadcast truck that we had outside, fire up the generator in the broadcast truck, and then fire everything back up. So that took about 15 minutes of me making conversation with the most powerful man in the world at that stage. And so, which is he's quite good in terms of like doing people talk.
He can do small talk.
He can do small talk, and it was particularly small with me. What about Clifton? That sort of stuff. So we made small talk for a while, and then I was still getting very nervous. But then it became clear that not only was our interview dependent on our generator, but the event that he was going to go on and speak at, and the PA. The only way that could go ahead would be with the BBC generator. So the power dynamic switched quite literally. Everything was dependent on me, and no one could tell me to hurry up because nothing else could happen without the BBC generator.
You got an hour and a half on.
So, and anyway, so we did the interview, and we sent it back, and then we kept the generator on and sort of powered up their gig, and it all ended happily ever after. Apart from the fact that then, sometime later, I sent the report back, got it away, and I got a phone call from one of the bosses saying, "Mark, when you were making small talk with the president, was that on or off the record?" And I said, "Well, look, neither of us thought anyone
was going to record
was listening to that because all the power was down, so we just assumed like everything was off."
What did he say?
Well, he'd said something.
Watch out for that fella Trump.
It was actually watch out for that fella George W. Bush, and he basically said George W. Bush is trying to make himself out to be a moderate, but he's actually much more extreme than he's making out, and he was giving various stuff. And the American networks have been sitting across this, and the audio had gone out to them, and they were all going to run with this line. It was going to make the American news that night. I basically said to the bosses, "You've got to stop this because, he would think that we were somehow trying to trap him." So we had to sort of pull them back and say, "Look, that was definitely off the record. Nobody had a clue that the mics were on."
Right, okay. Who's the most impressive politician? I said man there, didn't mean that, but it could be an impressive politician you've met, prime ministers, or local, or anybody. Who's you go, do you know what, that person kind of really impressed me?
I'm just trying to think. I mean,
nobody.
President Damon in particular. I was lucky enough to just very briefly interview. It's not really an interview, it's more of a doorstep on Nelson Mandela.
Oh.
And that was great.
Oh, that's a name drop and a half.
That was a name drop and a half.
Nelson Mandela, okay.
And
wow.
yeah, and he was every bit as good as I thought he would be. I was sent over to South Africa. There was, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time when some Northern Ireland politicians were brought out by the South Africans to try and learn from their process. And I was sent out. I said, look, the problem with being sent out on this job is that they're all in a military camp and they won't let me in. There's nobody to interview. So, it's going to be totally useless in terms of interviews. And I actually went out with a suitcase with a load of them interviewed, the people who are going to be taking part in this meeting, installment, but beside sort of anonymous-looking trees, South African tree in the background, with the theory being that if I couldn't get any interviews at all, I could at least use this kind of like pre-recorded stuff. And anyway, we're in a hotel, which was a smart new hotel in Cape Town, and I saw a certain amount of kind of people running around and cleaning up and things like that. And I just happened to say to the receptionist, "Oh, what's going on here?" And they said, "Oh, we're having like the official opening of the hotel today." And I said, "Oh, right, that's good. Who's opening it?" And they said, "Well, Madiba is." And that was Mandela. What time? And so I said to the camera crew, we're not going out to this military base in the middle of nowhere. We've got enough shots. Reuters has already got some shots, and we've got those ones. We're going to stay here and wait for Nelson Mandela. So Nelson Mandela turned up thinking he was going to just get a nice cup of tea at a hotel and just do an opening for the hotel and just a few photos, instead of which he had me chasing him round like a mad thing with a microphone.
Go, what do you think of power sharing in Northern Ireland?
And when he arrived, because initially there was like a sort of marimba band was playing away, and I kind of shouted, "What about Northern Ireland?" to him, and he said, "I can't hear you," and kind of walked on. And I thought he was just trying to ignore me or something like that. Like there was no interview scheduled for this bit. And I ended up running around and being kind of, me and the crew were sort of being chased around by his security guards who were all going, "No, this is not part of the plan. You're not doing this." But he then stopped in a particular area for these photos to be taken with the hotel management, and there were people snapping away. And I ended up kind of like crawling in front of the snappers on all fours, looking like a even smaller and lower kind of person than I normally am. And he, at this point, having thought, what on earth is this person up to? He looked down, smiled, and I thought, here is my chance. And it was... So I shouted up at him, "What is your message for your visitors from Northern Ireland?" And it turned out that he really was very hard of hearing. And he said, "I am sorry, I cannot hear you. Can you speak up?" And so I literally bellowed at Nelson Mandela, "What is your message?" And then he gave a perfect answer. We're very glad to welcome the politicians from Northern Ireland. We're not saying that what we've done in South Africa is a template for everything, but we hope if we can teach them anything useful, that blah, blah, blah. And I bellowed about 3 more questions at him and got perfect answers out of it. And I thought, well, this is great. You don't have to even leave your hotel to get one of your best interviews. But he was a very impressive character,
charismatic, and you could tell from just being close to him. Even
And later on that evening, we were able to get out to a jazz club in Cape Town and basically get a beer and relax after having had a long day's work. And a very large guy came over to me and kind of poked his finger into my shoulder and said, "I've got a bone to pick with you." And I thought, what is this? And it turned out he was like the chief bodyguard of Nelson Mandela, who'd been chasing me around the hotel. And I kind of explained, look, this was the one opportunity I had, and we ended up instead spending the evening with Nelson Mandela's bodyguard.
How did you let that buck agent through?
So you had a beer with Nelson Mandela's bodyguard.
It was great, who told me all about his time in the war. Yeah.
All right.
All right, on the ANC.
Yeah.
Wow. Mark, thank you very much. That time has flown as
It
usual.
has.
We've enjoyed ourselves.
I haven't even managed to do my bit of advertising.
Oh yeah,
Well,
what
you
do
do.
have you advertising something? I'm trying to plug your book already. Did we find out if it's still on sale? Is it on sale on Amazon?
Not available anywhere. But I tell you what, I will.
No,
You can buy a second hand.
you can buy a second hand. What are the reviews like on Amazon? But well researched.
3.5 stars.
Oh, come on! Don't even lie. The man's waiting. She'll have lied to 5 stars.
there's a
I've read it. It's a 5-star book.
It's
I'd
a
recommend
5-star.
it.
There's a much better book coming out actually, and
Right.
it's written by my colleague Stephen Walker.
Oh, yes, I
known
know
as
Steve.
Lord Walker of North Down.
Right.
And he's just written a new book about David Trimble.
Yes,
and
he wrote one about John Hume, didn't he?
He wrote one about John Hume, and that was a great read. And he's got this new book about David Trimble, and I'm going to go and meet him for lunch after we finish
All right.
this recording. But more importantly, the two of us are chatting about his book in Antrim on the 30th of October in
Wow.
the courthouse there.
In the courthouse. Oh,
yeah.
And, the
people are-
tickets are going like
Ah.
cupcakes.
Oh, very good. So David Trimble taught us landlaw. Did you know Irish landlaw?
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Was that fascinating?
Well,
Can't really say that.
hence our career as comedians. No, I did a bit of time for David and Daphne. Met Daphne recently. So a good book.
Yeah.
Recommended?
Is
it out yet?
It's. I'm not sure if it's out, but I read an advance copy, and the particularly good stuff I think is from his family, who give an insight into the
Right.
sort of the private life
Right.
of David Trimble.
Does he mention the fact that he taught me Irish landlaw?
Oh, there's a whole
Does that
chapter
come
about
up?
that actually.
God, the stupid student.
Idiots. They'll never make lawyers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for listening to the latest episode of the Give a Head podcast. And thank you very much to our sponsors, Hinch Distillery. Don't forget, if you like gin, Ninth Wave Gin would recommend, and the Irish Whiskey Peated Single Malt, Distillery.com if you want more information. And thank you very much to our guest, Mr. Mark Devenport.
Thank you, Tim.
Enjoyed that a lot.
Michael Damon, I enjoyed that too.
Thank you.
Enjoyed that.